today I'm going to talk about what we know from mostly the economics literature about the causal effects of retirement on health. This is important for this conversation because, as someone mentioned earlier, health and length of life are two of the big factors in our thinking about longevity risk management. And understanding the link between working life or retirement and health is crucial for both improving people's well-being and for designing optimal policy around retirement. Next slide, please. So there's multiple ways in which we can think about the act of retiring as changing people's health. On the one hand, it could be beneficial for people's health, well-being, and longevity if it leads to positive health investments or positive health life changes. It also could be that people are employed in physically demanding jobs, and retirement could have beneficial effects on their health if it allows them to refrain from that taxing and strenuous activity. Additionally, for some people, and in many people's minds, certainly, retirement is often associated with a switch from this kind of stressful, either physically or mental stressful work environment to a more relaxed and carefree schedule and experience, and that may prove beneficial for some people's health. On the other hand, the converse can also be true. There can be changes in people's physical, social, and mental activity that leads retirement to have a detrimental effect on people's health. For example, if employment gives people's lives meaning or involves positive social and mental interactions, then it would be likely the case that, or at least it's possible that retirement could have a negative impact on people's health. Of course, there are also other changes beyond activity with retirement that could be important determinants of health. Those include changes in resources, things like access to income, health insurance, as well as other financial resources. And as I talk about this literature, it's important to keep in mind that the combined effect of all of these things may very well differ across people, across individuals, and vary across populations. It could vary across ages. And so, it's important to keep that in mind as we assess the differences across different studies. There could also be differences in the relationship between retirement and health, depending on the type of metrics of health we use. And you'll see, I'll highlight that later, that there tends to be some differences when we're thinking about subjective measures of health and well-being versus when we're talking about objective measures of health. And then we also need to have in the background of our thinking, at least, that there may very well be differences in the effect of retirement on health when we're talking about the very short run and the longer run, so that any positive or negative effects of retirement on health may take some time to evolve. Some of them might accrue very quickly, but some might take some time to evolve. Next slide, please. So in order to determine what's the effect of retirement on health, one might be tempted to compare health of retired Americans, for example, to those that are not retired. But this comparison is flawed for at least two reasons. First, older Americans are more likely to be retired and to have poorer health and higher mortality, for example, than those that are even just a bit younger. And you can see this in figure 1, where I present information on the retirement rates. And what you can see is on the horizontal axis, as people age, they are both more likely to be retired and more likely to pass away. Next slide, please. So an alternative might be to think of a solution where we, hold age fixed and then just compare the pools of people who are retired versus not retired at that particular age. But the decisions about health and retirement are intertwined in ways that make even that comparison difficult to interpret. probably most relevant is the fact that having poor health is often a determining factor in the decision to stop working and enter retirement. And so even if we compared, groups of people that were on the same age, retirees may be in poorer health than those who have not yet retired. And this is evident in this figure here where, for example, in the top panel, by the way, this figure is reproduced from Insler 2014. In the top panel, the figure presents average reported health for those who are retired and not yet retired at a particular age. And you can see that in the top panel, the average reported health is higher at every age for those who are not yet retired. And this is illustrative of the fact that unhealthy people tend to retire earlier and healthy people tend to retire later. Next slide, please. So because this relationship between retirement and health is multi-directional and the two are intertwined, studies have used a variety of techniques to try to overcome this issue and identify the causal effects of retirement on people's health and well-being. Many of these studies have involved making use of various pension plan rules that create different incentives to retire for people who are otherwise quite similar. And using these rules in this way helps to overcome the problem that different types of people who are retired, the differences in the types of people who are retired may drive differences in health outcomes rather than the retirement itself. The first round of these studies largely made use of the, at least in the US, largely made use of the health and retirement study, which I know someone mentioned in the earlier panel. It's an ongoing nationally representative panel survey of Americans above age 50. And it's got, it's a really wonderful survey that has a rich wealth of information on people's health and labor supply behavior, as well as many, many other things. And so it's been really useful for trying to examine this question about the effect of retirement on health. And these studies using the HRS and some similar studies in Europe generally find that retirement has positive effects on subjective measures of health, like someone reporting that they're in good health as opposed to bad health. But they found limited evidence of an effect of retirement on more objective health outcomes, like blood pressure or mortality, for example. Next slide, please. And so, with the wealth of information that I talked about, the HRS is a wonderful resource, but it does have a relatively small sample, which may be part of the reason that people have been unable to uncover any effects of health on more objective health measures. It may just be the case that there's, not enough statistical power to identify these types of effects. And the other possible concern with the HRS is that it doesn't have as rich information about objective health measures. It's more likely to have self-reported measures about health conditions rather than actually measured health conditions. And so because a shift in retirement may lead people to have a different perspective on their health, it could be the case that their responses to these surveys and how that plays out in these earlier studies is capturing both the actual health effect and the people's perception of that health effect. And so in a more recent set of studies in the US and elsewhere, researchers, including myself, have begun to use administrative data, which helps us overcome these two problems by using objective health measures. In the case of my work with Tim Moore, we've used a census of deaths in the US. And it also offers us more statistical power because we do have the whole, the universe, if you will, of deaths in the United States over a couple of decades. And that allows us to, as I said, have more statistical power to identify even small effects in mortality. And so like these previous researchers, we make use of the fact that rules in the Social Security system cause otherwise similar people to retire at different times. Namely, we make use of the fact that initial eligibility for Social Security benefits for most people occurs at age 62. And that's a big driver of both Social Security benefit collection and retirement behavior, particularly for men. About a third of men collect their Social Security benefits at age 62, and about 10% of men retire exactly at age 62. So what we find is that there's an increase in male mortality right at age 62 of about 2%. That increase is largest for low-educated and single men, as well as those with certain types of lung conditions. And we do some work to try to unpack this overall estimate and to show, at least provide suggestive evidence that this change in health for these retiring men is really related to changes in their health behaviors rather than, and their life behaviors rather than the changes in financial resources and health insurance that I mentioned earlier. Interestingly, we don't find the same sorts of impacts for women at this age. In part, that may be because they're not as likely to actually shift their retirement behavior at these ages. Next slide. And so, to just conclude, the past 15 years or 25 years have seen a real explosion in particularly the economics research aimed at understanding the effects of retirement on health and longevity. And that's important for understanding these important patterns. The overall pattern of evidence from the US suggests that retirement may improve subjective well-being and subjective measures of health, but that it may actually be costly in terms of decreased physical health and in particular increased mortality. There are a few caveats to this study. It is just a study of mortality, and so I'm looking forward to the next set of research that will hopefully continue to build on this work using large data sets with a wealth of information on health inputs and objective health outcomes that will allow us to more fully understand the full dynamics of how health affects retirement, both generally or on average, and also for various subgroups of the population that may be particularly whose health may be particularly positively or negatively affected by retirement. Thanks.